So this evening, we are fortunate to have with us Rabbi Geoffrey Mitelman. He's the founding director of Sinai and Synapses, an organization that serves as a bridge in a way between scientific and religious worlds. It's been incubated by the National Jewish Center for Learning and Fellowship. He's been funded by a variety of different groups, including the Templeton Foundation, the Emanuel J. Friedman Philanthropies, and the Lucius and Littauer Foundation. Most of his writings will intersect with religion and science. They've been published in several different books that he's an author of. Among them are Many Voices, A Life of Meaning, Truths We Hold, and several others. He's also been an adjunct professor at both the Hebrew Union College, the Jewish Institute of Religion, and the Academy for Jewish Religion, and is internationally known for the work that he's done. Today, Rabbi Mitelman is going to talk to us about evolution, morality, and law, why we need more than love your neighbor as yourself. Rabbi Mitelman, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gail. Thank you, Maynard. Thank you to all who are joining here. I see a few names of people that I recognize. I've had such respect for IRAS for so many years, so I'm honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you all for joining. I want to say before I launch into my talk, I want to dedicate this to my father, who sadly passed away just over a week ago. He would absolutely be on here with everybody else. So I am thinking of him and connected with him. So this is very much in his memory and his honor. So it's wonderful to be with you all. I'm going to be talking about evolution and morality and law. I am ordained as a Reform rabbi, which is from the more liberal branch of Judaism. Tends to have a little bit more of a politically left bent, although there is a slightly wide political spectrum there. And a lot of what tends to happen is there is an element and an integration of basing a lot of wonderful social justice work, really important environmental work, generally grounding in a couple of different texts along the lines of love your neighbor as yourself, or we are all created in God's image. And so we'll advocate for a lot of ways of saying, as the text says, as the Torah says, justice shall you pursue. And that's why we need a 28% reduction in carbon emissions by the year 2035, which I think is probably a good thing. I don't know if those are the numbers to be able to say, but when I hear that, I say, I agree, and we're missing a few steps. We need to be able to look about and talk about these kinds of questions from a broader perspective and a more nuanced perspective and a more complicated perspective. So what I tend to think, and we're going to look at a couple of Jewish texts, and we're going to do a couple of conversations of looking at some evolutionary psychology, that we, at least in my mind, we are all created in the image of God. We all do need to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that's actually the root of every religious tradition. There is an element of where that comes in, of these conversations of the fact that Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism and Islam, every religious tradition has as its base, love your neighbor as yourself. And so I'm going to try to sort of re-engineer and reverse engineer where that comes from and why that is needed. And then looking at some of the broader conversations of what does morality look like and mean, and why do we disagree on what the questions of morality are going to look like. Usually when I present, I'm able to get a little bit of live feedback as we're going, so it's a little strange for me to be talking I'll be speaking and not hearing as much feedback. So hopefully people will be able to comment and raise questions and to be able to hear ideas, and if things do get a little bit more complicated, that I'll be able to hear that as well. I'm also excited to be talking with Calvin in just a little bit. So I am going to share my screen, and I'm going to start with a text that many of us know. I'm going to look at it actually in both the Hebrew and the English from Leviticus that I am going to share, if I can see where I'm looking at here. So this is This is from, by the way, a fantastic website called Safaria, which if you don't know, it allows you to be able to search and find all sorts of wonderful texts in different translations in different ways. This is from the book of Leviticus chapter 19, verses 16 through 18. Leviticus actually, as some of us may know, if you're in the Jewish community, you read Leviticus a lot. If you're not in the Jewish community, you probably ignore a lot of Leviticus other than the middle part of Leviticus, because Leviticus comes from, the name Leviticus comes from the tribe of Levi. It was originally the priestly code. It was instructions for the people who were going to be overseeing at first the Mishkan, the tabernacle that the Israelites carried around throughout the desert, and then became the temple in Jerusalem. And it was the instructions for how to be able to offer up sacrifices and how to deal with different elements of sexual sin and sexual morality. There were elements of the calendar that come in. And the center that often people talk about is this Leviticus 19, the holiness code is really, really wonderful. The verse is actually Leviticus 18. People are going to be much more uncomfortable with, because there are some laws that don't speak to us right now in terms of homosexuality. And so when we think about how wonderful the Torah is, how wonderful rabbinic literature is, how wonderful the Bible has to say, well, that it was written in a particular time, in a particular context. And so we need to be able to understand what did it mean in its context and how do we expand by it. So I want to start by looking at this text of Leviticus 19, 16 through 18, which is very foundational, but raises some interesting questions to be able to explore. I'll read it in Hebrew, and then I'll translate it in English, and I will explain that I bolded a few words that you'll see as well. So the Hebrew, lo telech rachil be'amecha lo ta'amod al dam re'echa ani Adonai, lo tisna et achicha b'levavcha hocheach tochiach et amitecha velo tisa alav chet lo tikom lo titor et bnei amecha ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha ani Adonai. Do not deal basely with members of your people. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow Israelite. I am Adonai. You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your kin, but incur no guilt on their account. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. Love your fellow Israelite as yourself. I am Adonai. So one of the things that we tend to hear a lot comes up in a lot of ways of I am Adonai. I am Adonai. The Hebrew word for often translated as the Lord. I try to create a more gender inclusive translation. So I took any male elements in there and tried to be a little bit more gender inclusive. But the key here is that it's I am Adonai, that we do everything because God is God. But the text here, there's three different areas in which we think about these kinds of questions. One is members of your people, amecha, the nations as well. Another is re'echa, your neighbor, your fellow, which did originally mean Israelite. We now expand that to mean a little bit more, but it does translate originally as the people of the Israelite people. And then your kinsfolk, the Hebrew is your brother, but we'll make it your kinsfolk, the people that you're related to. And there's three different expansions of who we are supposed to connect with and care with. We naturally care about our kinsfolk, our siblings. There is a reason, and we can talk about this evolutionarily, and this is not actually that complicated from an evolutionary perspective, because when we share our genes with somebody, we are invested not only in our well-being, but we're also invested in their well-being. I tend to be somebody who thinks that in many ways our bodies are our vehicles to be able to get our genes into the next generation. I am not a huge fan of Richard Dawkins as a theologian, although I do think that some of his work on the selfish gene that he wrote does actually have some good biology in there. I think his theology is absolutely atrocious, and I think that nobody should listen to what he has to say about religion, but I think he actually does say some good things about biology. And so when we think about our kinsfolk, the people that we're connected with, that's something that it's in our deep evolutionary history, mammals, even things that are non-mammalian, there is an element of being able to care about the well-being of those who are related to us. A little bit broader are our people. The Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. That is one thing. It's easy for us to be able to say, I care about my kids, I care about my parents, I care about my cousins. It's a little bit harder to be able to care about the people that are our third cousins, our tribes. And yet these are people that we're connected to. We know who they are. We are genetically related to them, and we're culturally related to them. So it's very easy to be able to focus on loving the people that we are directly related to. It is a little bit harder, but we can do it to be able to care about the people who are the member of our kin, but it's also about the people who are our re'echa, our neighbor. Those are people who are not necessarily directly related to us. I think that's what's an interesting element of this conversation, that it is our fellow Israelite, but the Israelites were actually 12 different tribes that they shared a little bit of history and family, but in fact, there's a lot of arguments that happen. I was saying when we were doing a little pre-work here, right now, my son is downstairs playing on his iPad, waiting for my wife and my daughter to come home from their violin lesson. And I normally do a lot of my work downstairs. I'm in my home office right now because my kids, who are 9 and 7 and adore each other and love each other more than anybody else, they also go at each other like nobody's business. And if you think about who your biggest fights are, who your biggest arguments are, probably as a child, if you had siblings, your biggest fights were probably with your siblings, less so with your cousins, less so with your extended family. The people that you love are also the people that get under your skin the most, which is also why it says you shouldn't hate your kinsfolk in your heart. You need to reprove your kin so that they incur no guilt on their account. There is an idea in Judaism that when you see someone doing something wrong, you need to be able to reprove them. And in fact, one of the things that I think is really important and really interesting is that when we reprove somebody, when we give them telling them what they're doing wrong, that needs to come from a pre-existing relationship. And that can come either biologically or that can come culturally and socially. But when we talk about these ideas of reproving the people who are around us, we do this with the people that we care most about. And so this idea of loving your neighbor as yourself, even though it starts as an Israelite, we've actually been able to expand that. And there's actually, I'm going to share in a little bit, another text that says there's an even greater idea than just loving your neighbor as yourself. That one of the things that is really incredible about religion and the text and in Judaism is knowing that we're able to actually work with people that we're not related to. That's really what is, in my mind, humanity's special sauce. And I'm not the only one who has thought this. There are a lot of scientists who wonder of why is it that our brains are so large, and why is it that we are able to be able to build lots of different build computers and build roads. I'm reading a book by my daughter called Unstoppable Us by Yuval Harari, which is based on his book of Sapiens. And one of the things, and there are some legitimate criticisms of Harari's work and of Sapiens, but one of the things that he does bring up is that 200,000 years ago, 300,000 years ago, humans were basically nothing. We were lion food, potentially. We were trying to be able to survive. We were just any kind of animal. And now over these many, many, many years, we're the ones who build roads and to be able to have Zoom and have webinars. And one of the reasons that we're able to do that is that we're able to cooperate with people that we wouldn't normally work with. And that's something that is really quite unique and quite incredible. And so what I want to be able to do is to be able to think about how we understand and relate to these immediate kinds of questions. What happened on the African savannah that allowed us to be able to then develop into these larger communities that are able to look at these kinds of texts and to be able to look at Leviticus and to be able to explore these questions of not just the ones of the people that we're directly related to, but how do we think about these kinds of questions when we're looking at these in a larger kind of way. So normally I pause here if there are kinds of questions. I'm going to keep going, but hopefully if there's somebody who's monitoring the chat, I also don't mind being interrupted halfway through if there is a question that comes in. But I'm just going to change my screen to be able to talk about a little bit of, and hopefully these screens are going to work, of the evolution of morality of what we're going to call as game theory on the African savannah. And I'm going to start by doing a little bit of a puzzle for you all. This is a puzzle that only humans are going to be able to solve. This is one that that if you find this a little bit difficult and complicated, it is supposed to be a little bit difficult and complicated. It is supposed to be hard. I often joke there was a wonderful show that many of you watched called Saturday Night Live. This episode was even a little bit before my time, where there was a debate between Dan Aykroyd and Jimmy and Dan Aykroyd as Jimmy Carter and somebody and Chevy Chase as Gerald Ford doing a presidential debate. And they asked a whole question here, and Chevy Chase as Gerald Ford said, "I was told there was going to be no math. If you were told there was going to be no math, it's a lie. There is going to be a little bit of math and logic here coming in." So I'm going to give you a little bit of a logic puzzle. I want you to not think about it too hard. I want you to try to react as quickly as you can. It's okay if you get it wrong, but I want you to be able to think about this. So I'm going to present 4 cards on here. 4 cards. They all are going to have a letter on one side and a number on the other. The slide didn't work exactly. There's going to be an A, a B, a 1, and a 2. So everything is going to have a letter on one side and a number on the other. So there's going to be it's either going to be an A is either going to have a 1 or a 2. The B is going to have a 1 or a 2. The 1 is going to have an A or a B, and the 2 is going to have an A or a B. So that's the rules of this game. That's all you need to know. Your job is to find out if this rule is true or if it's false. This is the rule you're trying to find out. If there is an A on one side, then there is a 1 on the other. So and you're going to see in a second the 4 cards. Your job, is this rule true? If there's an A on one side and there's a 1 on the other, which cards do you need to flip over? And here are the 4 cards. So you can type that in the chat. I don't know if I'll be able to see it, but type in which one or ones you think are going to be needed to get flipped over to find out if this rule is true. So take a couple minutes. Don't think about it too far. Okay. All right. Hopefully everyone's typed in their answer or thought about this. So which cards need to get turned over? Well, let's walk this through. The easy one is the A. We need to flip over the A because the A may have a 1 on it. That would be great. If the A has a 1, then we know that the rule is true. It says, right, I flipped over the A, there's a 1, it's true. Fantastic. I know if that's true or not. All right, I'm going to flip over the A. The other choice is that it may be a 2. And look, I'll find out if that way is true as well. I don't know if it's true or not. I'm just trying to find out, is it true or not? If I flip over the A and it turns out to be a 2, fantastic. I now know that the rule is false. So if you said flip over the A, you are correct 1,000%. Good job, everybody. So if you flipped over the A, that's the right thing. If you flipped over the B, I'm not quite sure if anybody flipped over the B. Hopefully nobody flipped over the B because I didn't say anything about flipping over a B. If I flip over a B, doesn't matter. Could be a 1, could be a 2. I didn't talk about the B at all. So if you said A, fantastic. If you ignored the B, also fantastic. So that is where that question is going to be. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky. The number 1. The number 1. Now you flip over the 1 and you find out that there is an A. That is fantastic. You find out it's true. That's great. But you already knew that because we knew that if we flipped over the A and the A turns out to be a 1, doesn't really give us any new information. It confirms what we knew from the first time. That's terrific. But we flip over the the 1 and we find out it's a B, well, wait a second. I didn't say anything about the B here. That's irrelevant. If I flip over the 1 and it turns out to be a B, it really doesn't matter. So if you said the 1, you got tricked, because a lot of people will say A and 1, but the 1 actually doesn't have anything to do with it. Because if I flip over the 2 and I find out there's an A, that's when I know that the idea has been false. And because if I flip over the 2 and I find out it's a B, also doesn't matter. I didn't say anything about the B. The answer is that you've got to flip over the A and the 2. Hopefully you at least followed this at least somewhat. And if you didn't, that's okay, because I'm going to ask you this exact same question, exact logical example that you're going to get instantly. You're going to get it probably even before I flip over the cards, because this is the exact same logical question in a different kind of way. You're a bartender and you're looking at people and you know a little bit, but not everything. You can see one person's 24, one person's 19, you see one person having a beer and one person who's 19. So you know either their age or what they're drinking. You want to find out if this rule is true. If a person is drinking beer, then that person is over 21. Who do you need to check? The person drinking a beer, the person drinking a Coke, the person who's 24, or the person who's 19? So you can take a second hit there as well. And you probably don't need to think about that very quickly. You're instantaneously going to be able to say, I need to check the beer and the 19-year-old. And again, I won't do that. I won't walk through here as well, but all I did is I copied and pasted exactly what I just did. That if the person's a beer, flip it over, 24, true, terrific. If they're 19 and it's false, then you know that they shouldn't be drinking beer. Person drinking Coke, doesn't matter. 24-year-old, again, if they're drinking beer, terrific, but the 24-year-old doesn't really matter. What matters is the 19-year-old drinking beer. And the reason that the second one was so much faster and so much easier than the first one is the first one was what some people call system 2, trying to really think through, what do I need to be able to do in these kinds of ways? The second way is your brain was thinking, is somebody getting a benefit that they shouldn't be getting? Is somebody cheating or not? We instantaneously know, we can feel, am I being treated fairly or not? Is someone loving their neighbor? Is someone treating me in the way that I need to be treated? Or are they not doing that? Your brain is working in a different kind of way when you're looking at it from a logical, thoughtful, intentional kind of perspective versus these ideas here as well. Which is why, for example, love your neighbor as yourself is not enough to be able to create all the reams of Jewish law and Catholic law and Muslim law and American law. When you're trying to deal with these kinds of questions, it's not enough just to be able to say, this person's cheating. We actually need both the instantaneous way of being able to say, here's what my brain is saying, is this person treating me fairly or not fairly? And then we're able to think through. That's why lawyers spend so many years, or rabbis, or imams, or priests who are studying, or pastors who are studying years and years and years of theology and nuance, is because we need to be able to not just start from what is the basics, but to be able to have a more complicated, nuanced, more evolved kinds of questions here. We tend to think about these kinds of are we being cheated or not? And in fact, a lot of my thinking is that much of these questions of morality are questions of cooperation and trust. That a lot of, for example, religion and religious law and American law, for example, need to be written because we are working with people that we don't necessarily trust, or that we can't necessarily trust. That's one of the incredible things that our evolutionary history has allowed us to be able to do, which is that I just came from Pasadena. Somehow I was able to put numbers into a computer to be able to say, I want to be able to put these numbers into my computer, and I am going to be able to physically get on a plane and land in Pasadena. And the airline company trusted that my numbers were going to be good. My bank account said I have enough money to be able to do this. That we're able to have this element of trust because we've created these structures of society to be able to help us work with people that we may not necessarily know and agree with. We're able to actually understand and trust the people who are closest to us. If you were to be able to write a legal document with your spouse about how often are you going to be doing the dishes or not doing the dishes, who's going to be picking up the kids or not picking up the kids, that's a little bit more of a problem, right? There's a level of trust that you have, and you can have conversations, but you're not going to write a 9-page document to be able to do this. So when we're thinking about these kinds of questions, it's because we're trying to be able to protect both our individual rights and our responsibilities to others. And that's so much of what religion is about. How do I act as an individual? What are my rights and what are my responsibilities? And so I want to do another little piece of game theory here of this question that comes up of how do I protect my own rights and my needs versus what my responsibilities are, particularly when I don't necessarily know somebody. What I'm going to present is what's often called the prisoner's dilemma, which you may or may not know about. And if you don't, I'll explain this here as well. But I'm going to try to create the absolute simplest version of what we would call the prisoner's dilemma. And here's what the prisoner's dilemma is, at least on the African savannah here. So imagine that you are somebody who's working with someone that you don't necessarily know. We'll call him Uck. And you and Uck don't know each other all that well, and you're pretty hungry. You're not starving, but you would like to be able to get some food. And the best kind of food that you can get on the African savannah is meat. You want to be able to find meat because meat gives all the things that you need. It's hard to be able to get. Problem with meat on the African savannah is twofold. One is that you might become meat. You don't want to become meat on your end. But even if you don't necessarily are prey, if you're trying to go after a gazelle, it's going to take a lot of time and energy to be able to chase that gazelle down. So you and Uck decide that you're going to try to work together. You're actually going to you see this gazelle standing at the watering hole. You're going to stand on opposite ends of this watering hole. And on the count of 3, you are going to jump and you're going to leap up and you're going to chase the gazelle down. And the two of you are going to take the gazelle down. One of you could probably do it by yourself, but if both of you do it, it's going to be a little bit easier. So you and Uck are sitting there and you're ready. And I want to try to make this as simple as possible because that's something that's helpful mathematically. So you and Uck are going to try to take down this gazelle between the two of you here. So I'm going to hopefully move this up here. So you and Uck are there, and you and Uck, you can each make a decision. So you can make a decision of you can try to help. You can be the one who's going to try to spend your energy and take down the gazelle, or you can sit on your rear end and let the other person do it. That's the choice that Uck has. It's also the same choice that you have. You can jump up and help, or you can sit on your rear end. So let's see what happens if you both help. If you both decide you're going to chase down this gazelle. Well, you're going to get the food, terrific. Both of you are going to get there, but you're both going to expend a little bit of energy. Not a huge amount, but you're going to get some food, but you're going to expend some energy. But you start to think to yourself, if Uck is the one who takes down the gazelle and you sit on your rear end, well, that actually, you get all the food because Uck will take it all down and you get to save your energy. That's actually not a bad deal there if you kind of act a little selfishly and act for yourself. Well, let's see what would happen if Uck sits on his rear end and you help. Well, that's really bad. If you sit and help and go after the gazelle and Uck sits, then Uck's going to get the energy and save his energy. So that's not good. That's the reverse. That's really, really bad. And what happens if you both sit? Well, if you both sit, there's no food right now, but there'll be more gazelles down the road. You'll save energy. There's no food, but it saves energy. So you start to think, all right, so these are the choices that Ak has. These are the choices I have. So let's see what happens here. Well, if we both help, that's going to be pretty good. You get the food, but you're going to expend energy. But if you sit and Ak helps, that's even better. That's fantastic. So that's actually, it's better if you sit, because you're going to get all the benefit, but you're not going to have any of the cost. That's, oh yeah, be good for if I sit, if Ak helps here. Well, let's see if Ak sits, and takes advantage of me. Well, it would be pretty bad if we don't get the food, but it would be worse if he gets the energy, and if he gets the food and I have to waste my energy. So it's probably better actually if he were to, if I were to sit. Well, wait a second. Either way, it's better for me to sit, because if I sit, it's a best versus pretty good. Best is better than pretty good, and pretty bad is better than worst. So no matter what, I'm going to try to sit here. So you make the decision that you're going to sit. Problem is, if you flip this around, Ak is going to make the exact same decision as you. And what's going to end up happening? You both are going to end up sitting. You're going to end up with no food, and you're going to end up in a pretty bad situation. So how do you resolve this? Well, there was a guy named Robert Trivers who figured out this prisoner's dilemma. It's actually totally intractable if you're doing it only one time. But if you're doing it repeatedly, well, then there's actually a way to be able to resolve this, because you're going to be interacting with this person over and over. If you get a reputation as somebody who sits all the time, then nobody's going to be helping you. If you are somebody who's helping others, you're going to have a good reputation to be able to be part of the community. You're not going to be ostracized. You're going to be welcomed in. You're going to be viewed as somebody who's really valuable here. So there was a guy named Robert Trivers who set up, it was a whole big computer competition to be able to help people try to figure out this prisoner's dilemma. And what he asked anybody to be able to submit any computer program and see what computer program was going to be the one that was going to win the most. And the one that won the most was the very, very simple idea, which was called tit for tat. Tit for tat said, I am going to start by helping. I'm going to start by assuming I'm going to trust somebody. But as soon as they defect, as soon as they sit on their rear end and think only about themselves, they're ostracized. No good. So tit for tat ended up being the winning strategy, until there was an addendum. There was one that did a little bit better. Because if you think about on the African savannah, for example, if you and Ak are going to both jump and go after the gazelle, and you intend that you're going to potentially try to help, but you hear a rustling in the grass. Well, you don't want to get eaten by the lion, so you stay very quiet. Well, then all of a sudden, Ak thinks that you're a cheater, that you're going to sit on your rear end, but you can say, well, actually, the lion was going to get me. So you're able to give an explanation. And now, is that true? Is it not true? That becomes a little bit of a harder question. So what they discovered was that actually the best evolutionary strategy was what was called tit for tat with forgiveness. To be able to say, look, you messed up. You did not do your job, but I'm going to give you a chance to be able to come back. And that allowed people to come back into the fold, and it actually encouraged people to be looking at some of these different kinds of questions of how do we learn to trust each other. There is an idea. I'm actually going to stop sharing and then reshare a little piece from Steven Pinker, who is an evolutionary psychologist, and I'm happy to share this as well, from a book called How the Mind Works. And one of the things that they talked about is that you can actually reverse engineer all of these moralistic emotions in this reciprocity game. That you can talk about liking. It initiates and maintains an altruistic partnership. It's a willingness to offer someone a favor. Anger protects a person whose niceness has left her vulnerable to being cheated. Furious people, many psychologists have marked that anger has moral overtones. Almost all anger is righteous anger. If you've ever seen the great movie Inside Out, you know that anger is there not as a bad person, but as somebody who cares deeply about fairness. Gratitude calibrates the desire to reciprocate according to the costs and benefits of the original act. Sympathy, the desire to help those in need, may be an emotion for earning gratitude. If people are most grateful when they need the favor, the person in need has an opportunity to make an altruistic go farther. Guilt can rack a cheater who is in danger of being found out. H.L. Mencken defined conscience as the inner voice which warns us that someone might be looking. If the victim responds by cutting off all future aid, the cheater will have paid dearly. He has an interest in preventing the rupture by making up for the misdeed and keeping it from happening again. Shame, the reaction to a transgression after it's been discovered, evokes a public display of contrition, no doubt for the same reason. So then it becomes the next round of evolutionary contest is, of course, developing an ability to discriminate between real emotions and sham emotions. We get the evolution of trust and distrust. When we see someone going through the motions of generosity, guilt, sympathy, or gratitude, rather than showing the signs of genuine emotion, we lose the desire to cooperate. So these are all these questions of being able to figure out that our emotions and our need to be able to trust and build cooperation. It all came from this idea of, is someone cheating? Can I trust this person? And I think what became very interesting, and Jonathan Haidt has done some really interesting work here. If we had time, I would spend a lot of time on this. I really highly recommend his book of The Righteous Mind that talks about a lot of these questions of these ideas of being able to say that morality is not just about care and harm, and not just about fairness and unfairness, but also questions about loyalty and purity and authority, which are integral to religion. These are ways in which they manifest themselves in a variety of different ways. Liberals tend to care a lot about care and harm, very deeply about care and harm, and also questions about fairness and unfairness. They don't care as much as where conservatives think about questions of loyalty and authority and purity. And so I think this is actually raises some questions, and I don't want to necessarily talk about this in this way, but I think for liberal Jews who have a deep connection to Israel and also have a deep connection to fighting for Palestinian rights, it creates actually a conflict, because there are two different values that are getting activated, where there is an element of loyalty, where there is a loyalty to the people who are part of my community, as we all feel connected to different tribes and as well. And we also care deeply about questions about harm and fairness. And so we are thinking about all of these different kinds of questions. So morality is not just one thing. Morality is a variety of different elements where we think about these questions of, who am I as an individual? Who am I as part of a larger society? And so where we view those kinds of questions, that's why a lot of the discussions about morality, if we say it is all about love your neighbor as yourself, it's a little too facile. It's a little bit too easy. It is the root of everything that is who we are as human beings. But when we're thinking about questions about international law, when we're thinking about the American society right now, or the international society, these are questions where the questions of morality is not just one thing. It gets activated in a variety of different kinds of ways. And so I want to spend just a couple last minutes looking at a few last Jewish texts here, because I'm a rabbi, so we look at Jewish texts. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and thinking about be able to end this here as well. I'm trying to figure out how I can exit out of this to be able to here we go to my my other screen of my text. That one of the things that is quite striking in Judaism and in the Torah that I really want to emphasize and end on here is that in Judaism, a few verses after it says, love your neighbor as yourself, the Hebrew Leviticus 19:34 Kezrach mikem yeh lachem hager, hagar itchem ve'ahavta lo chamocha ki garim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim, ani Adonai Elohechem. The stranger who resides with you, as to your citizens, you shall love one as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I, Adonai, am your God. That, in fact, there are only three entities in the Torah where we are commanded to love. One is our neighbor, which we're able to talk about. Another is God. You shall love Adonai, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And the stranger, you shall love the stranger. You're not supposed to necessarily love your parents. And I think what is really critical is that the word love has come in through a very Christian idea of emotion. Whereas in Judaism, the love is actually much more about the action. There's a whole rabbinic text of what does it mean to love God? And the idea is to love God. It means to follow in God's ways, to do actions, to cause people to love God through what you yourself are doing. That is how we show love for God. There's an idea in Judaism of what's called the Kiddush Hashem and the Chilul Hashem, of sanctifying God's name versus desecrating God's name. One of the ideas of the translation of the Ten Commandments of not carrying Adonai's name in vain, it doesn't mean to say words that we think it actually means. So I won't say it because for some that may be inappropriate to be able to hear. But what it really means is not to carry God in ways that are going to desecrate God and to be able to view God negatively. And we have seen so many places and areas in which where religion is used evilly, and people have a negative connection and negative association with religion, which is bad for religion and it's bad for God. Because if we view ourselves as representatives of a religious tradition and act in a way that desecrates God, it doesn't just desecrate us, it desecrates God as well. And I think that's an important thing to be able to think about, of being able to show that love, not just being able to say, I love you, but to be able to not just be able to say I love you, to be able to show that. There's a Hasidic text which said where there are two people who are saying, do you love me? And the other person says, of course I love you. And they said, do you know what causes me pain? And if you don't know what causes someone pain, you don't necessarily know and are not necessarily showing that love. And the way that actually I think is really critical, and then I'm gonna close here, and I'm happy to share this text. I wish we had more time to be able to share these ideas. There's a whole discussion of the rabbis in a rabbinic text called Sifra, also on these texts of love your neighbor as yourself. This one I won't read in Hebrew. It says, "You shall not take revenge, and you shall not bear a grudge against the children of your people." It says, "You may take revenge and bear a grudge against others." Because love your neighbor as yourself. And the rabbis say, actually, that's terrible. I don't like that at all, because Rabbi Akiva said, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the all-embracing text in the Torah. But a later rabbi says, Ben Azai says in Genesis 5:1, this is the numeration of the generation of Adam. When God created Adam, it was made in the image of God. This is an even greater principle. The thing is that if we say love your neighbor as yourself, you can actually circumscribe and say, well, that person's not my neighbor, I don't need to love them. Or you could say, I love my neighbor as myself, and maybe we don't actually love ourselves all that much. That in fact, the most critical thing is being able to treat everybody in the image of God, regardless of how we feel about ourselves, regardless of how we feel about them. That the idea is everybody has worth and dignity as created in the image of God. There's a difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy, we talk a lot about empathy, and I generally am in favor of empathy, but empathy puts a lot of spotlights on the things that get a lot of news. But we need a lot of compassion for the people who don't look like us, don't act like us, are not connected to us directly. There is an element of where everybody needs an element of compassion. On the flip side, we need to be able to have our own particular language and our own particular way in which we talk about these kinds of questions. I think we need to be rooted in our own particular religious text, our own particular religious tradition, our own particular religious community, and to be able to care about them. And I think it is okay to be able to say, in the same way that I say, without a doubt, my wife and my kids are the best. And I love my wife and my kids more than I love anybody else. And that doesn't make me a bad person. And in fact, I can say my kids and my wife and my kids are the best. And that can both be absolutely 100% true and absolutely 100% ridiculous. Because it's how do you even gauge that there? And so we need to be able to balance all of the different ways in which we think about these kinds of questions. And I'm going to end with a quote from the Dalai Lama, who talked about that ethics and morality is like water. You need water. Everybody needs water. We need water to live. But the Dalai Lama says religion is different kinds of teas. You can sprinkle in whatever kind of tea you want. You can have whatever element that is. It's going to color that water a little bit. You're going to drink it a little bit differently. We can appreciate different kinds of teas. I can say that is, I love that tea. I'm not such a big fan of that. We can taste teas that we wouldn't have expected otherwise. In the same way that language didn't exist to be able to give us language. Language evolved because we needed to be able to communicate. And we all have language. Everybody on earth, whether they're able to speak or not, everybody has language. But nobody speaks language. People speak English or French or Hebrew or Arabic, whatever language people speak in, that's how they communicate. And there's going to be shades on that, and there's going to be disagreements, and we need to be able to understand how somebody else is speaking a different kind of language. But in the same way that language and water and ethics and morality are the basis of everything and need to be the basis of everything, how they play themselves out, that's where the complicated elements are going to be. And we can't just say we're all the same, we're all created in the image of God. That is true. But we need to be able to say, this is what my particular language or my particular tradition, how I tend to approach this. It doesn't mean it's the only way. It doesn't mean it's the right way with a capital T, capital R, capital W. It means it's the way that I am going to explore these kinds of questions, and I want to learn about how you are approaching them as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Mitelman. This is really great, very inspiring. I want to remind people that they can start entering questions in the Q&A, but we have a respondent today. Our respondent is Dr. Calvin Chatlos, and he is a professor of psychiatry at Rutgers University in New Jersey. He's a child and adolescent and addiction psychiatrist, where he does research and incorporates the spiritual experience in recovery from addiction and trauma. He's also a member of the Society for Ethical Culture, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Monmouth County, and a council member of IRAS. He is a developer of the Human Faith Project, focused on the role of self-worth and dignity in opening a universal core of religious spiritual experience and its empowerment of creativity. Please, Calvin, please take it away.
Thank you very much. And Rabbi Jeff, I feel like I have just had a smorgasbord, and this is such an important topic, cooperation. Given everything that's going on, almost so well needed, but your smorgasbord, I don't think gave me a decision as to who should I vote for.
That was intentional.
So let me spend a minute just to highlight a couple of things. You covered a lot of ground, and it made me feel like a juggler. But several things. You started with reason, trying to decide the game logically. Then you said we have to bring in cooperation because it's with someone else. Then you added feelings and fairness, which made it a little more difficult, but the solution was tit for tat. So I felt a little grounded. And then you did something that's the first time I've heard it in this. You added forgiveness. So I have a question. I'm trying to think of a question that might have you at least elaborate on some of it. Evolution, morality evolved. Do you think that morality was present before 5,000 years ago?
Mhm.
Before the Jewish tradition, before Moses and Abraham, before even the Eastern traditions, because you have a real balance of thinking, later human, and emotions, early humans. What's your thought about all this?
That's a great question, and I think I want to draw a distinction between morality and ethics, and I think that's an important distinction. Where morality, I think, tends to be more universal and more, although there are differences and shades, but morality is pretty kind of an instantaneous emotional reaction. We sort of tell immediately, is this moral or not? The questions of ethics is a lot more complicated. There's a professor at Emory, Paul Root Wolpe, who said everybody can answer. He teaches bioethics. There's a really important question of like, fill out, and I'm going to, Calvin, if it's okay, because I know you're unmuted, I'm going to put you on the spot to be able to fill in the blank here. Ethics is the decisions between right and
Wrong.
Yeah. He says, nope, that's incorrect. Ethics is right versus right. That's the hard thing. I mean, again, this is something that I'm was grappling with, right? So a week and a half ago, my father was on life support and had to try to be able to decide, was he going to prolong his life, or given that he was not going to be, there was going to be no neurological coming back, was it time to be able to sort of let him pass peacefully? Do that happen now? Do I let my kids say goodbye? Right? This was not a simple question of, well, this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. There were a lot of competing values here, and I ultimately had to make a decision. But the ethics is much more complicated. So morality, I would say, probably did exist even a couple 100,000 of years ago. Now it evolves over time as morality and ethics have evolved over time. There were things that we viewed 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago as totally immoral. And now we're like, really? People view that as immoral? And may we, 50 years from now, people look back on our decisions and say, really? That's what they thought was moral? What we think we're doing is the right thing. But I think that ideally morality evolves. And so, and ethics evolve. So I think that morality probably is actually even deeper than 5,000 years. I think morality is something that needed to evolve as we were evolving as Homo sapiens. The questions of ethics, that came more in terms of agriculture and how do we create a system and writing and records and specialized classes. That there's a reason that a lot of religions came around the same time of the axial age. So I think that's my skirting around your question there.
No, that's great. So you're saying there was an emotional, moral core of something maybe 100,000 years ago, and as man and civilization developed, we moved into ethics for different types of decisions.
And animals have,
that was pretty good. You didn't run around the topic.
Thank you. Well, man, we get to, like, there are animals that are symbiotic, right? When there are animals that help each other, quote unquote, help each other out, they're not thinking of like, oh, should I clean this ant or not? The aphid is not thinking about these kinds of questions. But that's there was a piece that we did on Sinai and synapses about called the 3 billion year old golden rule. I mean, it is before humans these ideas came into existence.
Great. I think we should open it up to questions. Gail, anything coming up? But I'd like to give you a hand. I really enjoyed it. It was thought-provoking, and it'll make me think for a month.
Thank you so much, Calvin. That was really great. Both of you have really given us a lot of food for thought. Let's start out with questions, and let me just remind people that you can enter your questions in the Q&A box. The first question is, how do we move from loving our neighbors to loving our enemies? Isn't loving our enemies risky?
That's a great question. And loving your enemy is that's a Christian idea. Judaism does not say hate your enemy. That's actually not in the text as well. So I think there are a couple of different ways to think about this. One is framing somebody as an enemy is problematic in and of itself. Nobody is the villain of their own story. Nobody comes in and says, you know what, I'm going to make a decision and I want it to be evil and hurtful and destructive. That's what I want to do with my life. We see I am right and good and pure. Those people are horrible and evil. A lot of what we need to be able to do is frame questions where we can actually find a level of common ground. And so one of the things that I have found to be incredibly effective is community organizing. And this was something that I did a little bit with in rabbinical school. I am nowhere near trained as real community organizers. They do incredible work, but community organizers start with talking with people, and often they do one-on-one questions, and they ask people two questions that I think are the best questions to be able to get to know somebody. What keeps you up at night, and what gets you out of bed in the morning? So if I were talking to somebody, and I'll put my cards on the table, I tend to be pretty left of center. I tend to be pretty in favor of gun control. I'm pretty in favor of those kinds of questions. So being able to talk to somebody who is in the NRA, as soon as I say, how can you possibly believe that? That's actually going to alienate. But to be able to say, tell me, what's your animating anxiety? What's keeping you up at night here? And what gets you out of bed in the morning? And the truth is, I think if we can start that conversation, there actually can be some resolutions here. There's a fantastic organization called Do Not Stand Idly By, which is founded by Rabbi Joel Mosbacher, whose father was killed by gun violence, and he's become an extraordinary advocate, and actually been able to resolve some of these issues by doing some research and finding out that actually the vast majority of illegal guns are just a small number of gun owners, of gun stores, and where there. So the question was, how do we close the loopholes? And the biggest purchasers of guns are actually the police and military. So if we're actually able to get the police and military to be able to buy smart triggers and things like that, there actually has been a little bit of movement to actually help alleviate some of what's been happening with the gun death epidemic. So by starting by saying, you are my enemy and I'm going to love you, yeah, that's risky. But if you come in and start by saying, what am I actually trying to do? What would a win look like here for me? That's something where actually the person stops being an enemy and starts being a problem solver with you.
Okay, great. Next question. How do you so today we have a very divided society. And it seems that the risk-taking behavior is like in full blown, the aversion to risk is in full blown, it exists everywhere. Can you give some advice for how you might want to overcome that outside of taking risk, taking risk situations?
Yep. And it's going to sound silly, but yeah, there's a lot of risk. And some people are going to say, be brave, be vulnerable, be risky. No, I don't think that's actually the right way to do it. If you want to talk about a hot button issue, you don't want to start going, I'll use guns blazing, if I can use that phrase. You actually want to start with something really simple and really actually a point of connection and community. So some of that might be asking these people what keeps you up at night, what gets you out of bed in the morning, but that also is a little bit of a risk. I went through a couple of years of wonderful therapy, and my therapist had said, you can be right or you can be in relationship. And I think it is much more important to be in relationship than it is to be right. And the only way that you can actually build these kinds of questions is to build the relationship. And you got to start with silly, stupid things. What's your favorite sports team? Are you both fans of the same sports team? Do you like the same restaurant? Are you involved in after school activities? Build that relationship. That's actually where some of these ideas can happen. There's actually a wonderful rabbi, Rabbi Rachel Schmelkin, who was a rabbi right after the march in Charlottesville. And she has done some fantastic work where she's actually been trying to be able to get to know some of the people who were the white supremacists who were marching in Charlottesville. And there's another friend of mine, Rabbi Rachel Bregman, who has done some wonderful work of these kinds of questions of how do you do this? And it's slow, it's painful, it's bottom up. So I think a lot of these questions are how do we I think rebuild trust. I think that's been one of these big questions. It's been the theme of what I was talking about earlier today, but we have lost trust in our institutions. People lost trust in religious institutions, in political institutions, in the scientific institutions, in educational institutions, and we've lost trust of being able to interact with each other. So I think that's a large part of it. And if I can give a very practical piece, even though I'm always inclined to be able to do it, don't share funny memes. I know we want to be able to do that because what that ends up doing is you end up talking to the people that you already agree with, and it doesn't actually move the needle at all. It makes us feel good. It makes the people who are on our feed to be able to do that. And it actually, in my mind, makes society worse.
Great. Thanks so much. Maynard, you have a question.
Yeah, this is very helpful, Rabbi Jeff. How do we go about transforming the individual ethic into public policy?
Oof, that's a hard question, and sadly, I think above my pay grade. If I was able to figure that out, I would do it in a second. I think part of it is recognizing the importance of the community. One of the things that was really challenging in COVID, and I think it's reflective of our larger society, which is our American society, which for better or for worse, I tend to think tends to be grounded in a lot of white Protestant Christianity from a couple hundred years ago, where a lot of it was about the individual and what are my rights. And COVID really focused on what's my responsibility to the community. And the truth is we need both, right? We need to be able to protect our own individual rights. That I'm a big fan of everyone having their own individual rights. And at the same time, we need to be thinking about what's our responsibility to the community. And I think that's one of the harder things to be able to think about. We tend to focus so much on what can I do as an individual. And sadly, I think the answer is not much as an individual. But when we're able to join together as a community, that's actually where a lot of impact can happen. There's a line that I like when it comes to the climate change. More important than changing our light bulbs is changing our leaders. I think that's there's a lot to with questions of climate change, of what can I do as an individual? And the answer is really, really little. But if you're able to advocate for enough policies and to be able to join together in a larger group and influence business leaders, government leaders, political leaders, that's where the change can happen, more than making sure you rinse out your tomato sauce cans.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. And thanks, Calvin. That's the end of our questions, but we're really grateful to you both for joining us.